Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are really excited today. We're going to be talking about tax liens and tax deeds and investing in Florida tax defaulted properties. We've got an amazing speaker here today with Phil Kessler. I'll give you his bio in just a second and hand it over to him. Before I do that, though, just a couple things here. We have the ability for you to type in the Q&A. If you have questions and answers, you'll see on the chat bar that you can type into that. Periodically, I'll try to stop Phil and ask him a few questions. If we have a lot of questions that we can't get to throughout the course of the presentation, we'll ask him those questions at the end of the presentation. We're going to remain online here for at least maybe 10, 15 minutes or more to answer the questions that you've asked. And of course, Phil will be providing the contact information for the Property Onion Academy, where if you want to ask more detailed questions and learn a lot more about tax deeds and tax liens and also regular foreclosures as well, the Property Onion Academy is really an amazing organization, and they're fantastic at teaching people how to make money, how to buy properties, and how to find great deals on properties with foreclosures and tax deeds. Let me go ahead and just give a quick intro for Phil Kessler here. I actually had a bio prep for you, but for some reason I'm not finding it here. But I do remember that you've invested in over $200 million in properties, Phil, over the course of your career, and you work for some large, I believe it was hedge funds. I know that right now you're one of the owners of the Property Onion Academy, and we're really excited to have you. So let me turn it over to you. And if you want to just give a quick little background and intro of yourself and take it from here, Phil.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. My name's Phil Kessler. I'm a professional tax lien and tax deed investor. And just to recap, and I don't like to talk too much about myself, but I've worked for a few hedge funds over the past decade, investing in tax defaulted property and foreclosures. I've been investing for about 12 years personally. And I started out really just, I had a 9 to 5 and I kind of, did it on the weekends, and it's just really grown into something different where this is just my full-time career. And I think a lot of people coming into a new path of investing, kind of wonder if it's something that can turn into a career. I can tell you it takes a lot of work. And I think the biggest thing that I want to give to you today is the ability to, to give you something tangible that you can at least take with you today. And you can turn that into maybe the beginning of a new career, new journey. So let's just jump into it. Now, I want to preface everything with, we're going to be talking basics today. There may be a few of you here who have purchased tax deeds or possibly even tax lien certificates, and you may be familiar with a lot of the processes that I'm going to talk about, but I want to make the assumption that this is your maybe first time getting into it. This way we can all get up on the same page as we get into more advanced things. So let's get in and let's just talk tax liens versus tax deeds. What's the difference? I like to differentiate these two because they a lot of times get lumped together as one and the same, but they are two very different styles of investments. And let's talk about tax liens first. So tax liens are the shortest way to explain it's like a hard money loan, right? You're lending money when you buy a tax lien. And think of it like this. So we're going to take Palm Beach County. Palm Beach County has an annual budget every single year. Let's just say, and I'm going to use fake numbers here, but let's say Palm Beach County's budget is $100 million. Okay, so about half of the money that Palm Beach County gets for their annual budget is coming from property taxes every year. So we have a $50 million revenue coming from property taxes. And when property tax time comes around, Palm Beach County only gets $40 million. There's a $10 million deficit that the county is running on now because people didn't pay their property taxes. Now, the money that or the things that the county pays for with this money are things like police, fire, paving roads, even though it probably doesn't seem like they do that much. They do, teachers, things like that. And when they get that money in from property taxes and they're running on this $10 million deficit, they can either not pay teachers this year, or they can try to bridge the gap. And this is where tax liens come in. So Palm Beach is running on a $10 million deficit. And let's say part of that is from Bob. Bob, and I apologize if your name is Bob. Uh, Bob has a $100,000 home and he pays $1,000 a year in property taxes. Now, Bob, for whatever reason, maybe it's a financial hardship or something else, Bob didn't pay his property taxes this year. So Palm Beach County is going to take Bob's debt, that $1,000, and they're going to offer it up for sale to investors. They're going to say, let's say I step in and I purchase this lien. This is what the lien is. I purchased this lien for $1,000. Bob is given a grace period at this point. So the county's saying, okay, Phil, you give us $1,000. We're going to give you this certificate that says you're owed $1,000, and we're going to guarantee you an interest rate and over a certain period of time. So this is the terms and conditions of my loan. So I'm buying this tax lien from the county. They're offering me 18% interest, and the term is 2 years. Right now, at the end of that 2-year period, if Bob hasn't paid me back, I'm allowed to foreclose or at least initiate the foreclosure on Bob's home. Now, this doesn't mean that I take possession of the property. And while in some states that's exactly what happens, in Florida, that's not really what happens. And that kind of takes us to the second part here, which are the tax deeds. So I'm still unpaid for my $1,000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to initiate the foreclosure. In this foreclosure process, we call it a tax deed application. And Bob's house is going to be placed up for auction at a tax deed sale. Now, a tax deed investor can come in and, let's say, again, I'm owed, after everything's said and done, maybe I'm owed $5,000. Everything I've come out of pocket and all my interest. Bob's property is going to go up for sale at this auction. Bidding would start at $5,000. So if anybody were to purchase this property at auction, say you, the deed investor, comes in and you buy it for $50,000, I'm made whole. I get my $5,000. You're getting the property for $50,000. And then that $45,000 overage, that's very likely going to go back to Bob if he applies for it. Right. So the big difference between liens and deeds, where liens were lending money and deeds, you are taking title to the property. You have immediate possessory rights on that property. Does that make sense? Did I state all that clearly?
It does. And just to maybe explain it in a little different way, at least kind of how I look at things is, a lot of people, investors, want to look for great deals and to find properties for under market value prices. Typically, those are going to come in a few different, sort of a few different buckets. One being regular bank foreclosures, which we're not talking about today. We may have another webinar on that in the future. But the other typical way that it comes is with these tax deed foreclosures or tax deeds, what we're talking about. And that is the auction process that we'll get into here that forecloses on that property, and then they're sold at that auction. You can buy those. Tax liens are those, the tax lien investors are investing in for the 2 years prior to the auction, and they are getting an interest rate or a return on. Correct? Am I summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. I mean, it's the same process. It's just, when are you coming in as an investor? Are you coming in the beginning, or are you coming in at the very end after the foreclosure's done? Right. It's the two sides of the same exact process.
And oftentimes those are two completely different investors, right? So someone owns the tax certificate, the tax lien on the property, and they are getting that return, and then the property is sold at auction. Sure, that same investor can bid on the property, but that doesn't mean just because they have the tax lien or the tax certificate that they are going to win that tax auction, correct?
You got it. Yeah, you nailed it.
Perfect. Okay, well, good. Hopefully the audience gets that.
Yeah, and let us know if you don't, right? If you want me to elaborate on
Sure.
it.
I do have one question from Maria, and hi, Maria. With a tax deed, you're taking title of the property, but what happens if there is another lien like the IRS or mortgages? Great question. And I know Phil's going to be getting to that. If you want to answer that now, or do you want to wait?
Yeah, I
Phil,
think I'll do I'll do a little bit of an answer now, and then we'll maybe dive into it a little bit deeper in a
deeper
moment.
dive. Yep.
Yeah, so when you're purchasing a tax deed, it's actually an interesting type of deed because you're buying a brand new title to the property. And that's essentially what a tax deed is. And some of the things that happen when you purchase a tax deed are junior encumbrances. These are things like mortgages, HOAs, maybe mechanics lien, or maybe a credit card judgment. Those things are wiped off of the property, right? And this is why I think tax deeds, one of the interesting thing about tax deeds versus foreclosures is that it's really just like a binary: liens either survive or they don't, because they're either government issued or they're not. So government liens typically survive a tax deed sale, with a few minor exceptions. These would be like federal liens, like IRS, Department of Justice. A couple of these, like these federal liens, don't have the same surviving power that a city, a county, or a state lien does. And so this is also something that changes state to state. Like in California, an IRS lien would survive because of the way California law is written, but the federal law says that it doesn't survive. They have a right of redemption. So I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more when we get there. But really, the big ones you're looking for are from the city, the county, and the state.
One thing just to differentiate too, again, we're really not focusing today on bank foreclosures, but the difference with bank foreclosures is that the attorneys who are bringing that bank foreclosure, they have to name all the possible parties that maybe have an interest in that, and they have to go file against it could be the state, it could be the city, it could be certainly any other mortgages, a second mortgage, the association. So they have to go through that. Whereas with these tax deed auctions, like you said, it's kind of binary. It's either it is being wiped out or it's not. And most sort of encumbrances are wiped out.
Right.
Correct, Phil?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and there's no defendants here in tax deeds because it is not a judicial process in order to foreclose. It's just an administrative one. So the rules are just kind of set. So that's why I think another
Exactly.
big difference there.
Yes.
So another thing that we can get into here is just like, why invest in tax liens? Obviously, there's an interest rate, but why tax liens and why now, right? Why is now the important time to do this? Well, let's talk about just the obvious things. So first, they're very low risk. We talked about a scenario a moment ago. I gave the analogy of a hard money loan. Now, typically, and for those of you who have some real estate experience, a hard money loan is basically, a loan you're taking against property at a high interest rate, and typically to do like a flip or some sort of rehab. But with a tax lien investment, it's the loan that you're offering against the property is usually 1 to 3% of the value of the home, right? A traditional hard money loan, you might be taking 60 to 70% of the after repair value, or we'll just say 60 to 70% of the market value. And, if you're a hard money lender, that seems, maybe a little risky, maybe not. But when you're lending only 1 to 3% of the market value, your risk goes significantly down. So it's a very low risk investment. Now there are pitfalls. I don't want to make you think that this is like just throw a dart at a board. You do have to have some understanding of what you're doing. It's a high yield investment as well. Now there's a couple of things here that I just give some background on. The largest purchaser of tax liens in the country right now are hedge funds and banks. And when I was younger and before I got into this, I always thought like a hedge fund was just kind of a bunch of people who threw their money into a pot and they invested with that money. But what these hedge funds do, in regards to tax liens is they're leveraging about 80% of the money that they use to invest, right? So they'll say they have a $50 million fund. Well, 10 million of that might be personal capital and 40 million is going to be borrowed capital. And whenever you borrow money, you're paying interest on that money, right? So as we've seen interest rates go up over the past few years, the cost of money's gone up as well. So what we're seeing in the tax lien world is that these hedge funds are starting to pull money out of the tax sales. Where if you to go back to 2020, 95 to 98% of every single tax lien that was purchased was bought by a bank or a hedge fund. That number is decreasing significantly. And also the rate of return is going up as well. It is a high yield investment. And now more than any time over the past 10 years, we're seeing higher rates of return on these people's investment as they're getting invested, specifically in the state of Florida, and others as well. So when I talk about tax liens today, I'm going to be referring specifically to Florida, but we do, I've invested in over a dozen states, and our mentors and trainers have invested all over the country as well.
Phil, just
Yes.
two questions. One, that's my question is, as of recently, let's say maybe 2024, what are you seeing some average rates of return in the state of Florida for tax liens? Again, we're not going
Sure.
to pin you down and say this is exactly what you're going to get, but just a rough estimate. Are we seeing them 4 to 6% or 3 to 5, or what's the
Yeah.
average?
So 6, 7% is about what is average. Now, there's a couple of things to take into consideration where I would say the average annual rate that someone is bidding their tax lien to would be about 6 or 7%. However, there is a 5% mandated minimum that you receive on any tax lien that you purchase in the state of Florida. And so, a really clever thing that these banks and hedge funds do is they'll look at someone's tax payment history to see what kind of patterns and habits this individual may have. So, if they see someone who's, every year there's a tax lien issued, and every year they're paying it off within 90 days, they might bid the interest rate down to 1/4% a year, right? If this happens, year after year after year, when they bid on the tax lien, they're bidding to the lowest rate they're willing to accept. So they'll bid down to say 1/4%. But if you're receiving 5% on your money within 90 days, that's a 20% annualized rate of return, right? Does that make sense? I know I kind of have trouble explaining that sometimes, but if you're getting 5% return as a minimum guaranteed, and let's say we buy $100 tax lien, 90 days later, we receive a check for $105, right? We're getting that 5% return. But because we did that in a 90-day window instead of 365,
It's the time value of money. Yes.
correct.
So obviously people want their 5% back in 90 days rather than their 5% back in a year, for example. So
Correct.
totally get that. The only question I would have on that is, what does the 0.25% get them though? If they're bidding, you said they bid it down to 0.25. What does that get
Yeah.
them?
So this actually has to do with the auction process in the state of Florida, right? Now, the state of Florida offers 18% on any tax liens that are sold at auction. But in order to compete, right, these auctions are a competition. And the person who wins is the person who's willing to accept the lowest rate of return on their investment. So they start at 18, but let's say you bid 9% and I bid 8.75. I'm going to win that tax lien. That's the lowest bid. So if someone's able to see that someone has a clear payment history of paying off in the first, say, 6 months, they might bid it all the way down to 1/4%. That's the lowest bid that's the lowest you can go while still receiving your 5% penalty. And I might be getting too far into the weeds here, but
But let's say hypothetically that person screws up, meaning they thought they were going to pay it off in 90 days, and let's say they don't pay it off and the property is foreclosed, and let's say they bid it at 0.25%. How much are they getting in total back at that time? Is that 2 years later? Well, and what are they getting back?
Yeah, so they would be getting 5%. The best way to explain this
Okay.
5% penalty is you have two buckets. And when you buy a tax lien, and bucket number one goes 5% on day one. Now, in the second bucket, interest starts accruing. Let's just say you had a 12% interest rate. This interest accrues at 1% a month, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when you get to 6 months, when you get to 6 months, 6% has accrued, and then the 5% would be wiped out. So you're getting either the 5% that you receive on day one,
Higher of the two.
the interest
higher
that's
of the two.
accruing in
Okay,
bucket two.
got it. Understood. Okay, that makes some sense now. Good.
Yeah.
I will. We've got several questions, but let's just answer one, and then we'll let you keep going. And
Sure.
Suzanne asks, "Are the tax lien interest rates set every year?"
So it is completely up to the investor, right? So there are some states that change their interest rate every year, like Colorado offers 9% over whatever the Federal Reserve's prime rate is, right? So this year it's 15%, but 2 years ago it was only 9%, right? So you just kind of see some states you see different rates, but in Florida specifically, it's always 18%. And you're always bidding down the interest rate if you're participating in the auction.
Got it. Okay, good.
The availability of tax liens, I guess the availability of property is what makes tax liens interesting is too. I mean, you would be astonished if you looked through the tax lien list in your local county to see what properties aren't paying their taxes. I mean, you'll see stuff on the water in Palm Beach, these, $200,000-$300,000 tax liens. You'll see hotels, like I've seen the Hyatt Regency in downtown Denver. I have seen roller skating rinks. I mean, if you can think of the property, there's been a tax lien on it. And I think that's really an exciting, the idea of that's exciting, being able to invest in a type of property where, traditionally you wouldn't have the ability to invest in that type of property. Unless you had a significant sum of money. I think that's one of the things that makes tax liens interesting as well.
And then one more thing.
yeah.
What about the timing of these tax lien auctions? When are they? When do they happen throughout the year?
That's a great question. I have it
Perfect. Okay.
answered right
Let's
here.
do it.
Yeah, that's a perfect question because
Love it.
these auctions, they're once a year, right? So you have to be paying attention to, if you were in the state of Florida, those auctions happen right around June 1st every single year. So if you start looking into this on June 3rd, you're already too late. You're going to have to wait a full year before you could participate in another tax lien auction. But there are other ways to purchase certificates, right? We have our annual auctions where everything that the county has goes up for sale and people bid on it. But, the thing is that there are certain liens that people are not going to bid on. They're just things that won't sell at these annual auctions. And the properties fall into one of two camps. And one camp is that it's kind of a piece of junk. You'll see, like I said a moment ago, you'll find tax liens on everything. And that includes, a 6-foot stretch of sidewalk or, a 2-inch wide 100-foot long easement that was, to put a cable in or something like that. And you don't want to buy tax liens on those properties because they're not going to pay back. And if you did foreclose, there is a good chance you would end up taking title to that property. And, if it's 2 inches wide and 100 feet long, there's not a whole lot you could do with it. Maybe you could put a sign on it, like 1 inch and, but realistically, the other camp that those over-the-counter certificates fall into are properties that have plenty of value. It's just the actual lien amount, the dollar amount of the lien is below a certain threshold, right? So if we go back to our example of the hedge funds, right? These hedge funds will pay a consultant, let's say they pay a consultant $30 an hour to do research on a list of liens. Well, if it's a $100 lien, even if it's on a really valuable property, the maximum interest they're going to earn on that each year would be about $18. So they'll have rules that they set for these consultants that do research to say, don't go below $400 or $500 for the lien amount. Um, and so a lot of times what you see in this over the counter market are properties that have plenty of value. It's just that the dollar amount was low enough that none of the hedge funds actually purchased it. So there's plenty of good inventory in the over the counter market. Remember, these are the properties that did not sell, or the liens, I should say, that did not sell at the annual auction. But you have a much more limited inventory there than you do at the annual auctions, right? You might have 20,000 tax liens in the Palm Beach auction, but at any given point, there might only be 1,500 tax liens in the over the counter list in Palm Beach, right? So much more limited inventory. Um, the other thing I'll say about auctions, and I know this wouldn't pertain to everyone, but if you are in a position where you have a large savings, maybe a self-directed Roth IRA, these like a large sum of money that's not doing anything, it's just sitting waiting for the next investment. This is a very simple way to bury a large amount of money. If you said, well, I have $100 million to invest, we could probably do that in a handful of auctions. Last year there was $3 billion, might be five. I think it was $3 billion in tax liens. No, I'm sorry. I think it's just under $2 billion in tax liens in the state of Florida.
Still very
At
significant.
yeah,
Yeah,
large sum.
a lot of opportunity. Well, one other question, you mentioned that it was low risk. What could a possible risk be on a tax lien? Like, what if you bought the tax lien on that sidewalk that no one else really wanted, and to foreclose on it, is anyone going to buy that sidewalk at a tax auction, tax foreclosure?
No, right. So this is, I'll tell you, the foundation of all investing, tax lien or otherwise, is how much is this going to cost me and what is it worth? Right. And with some of these parcels that'll have tax liens on them, the cost of acquisition of just the property, which would be the taxes and maybe foreclosure fees, may be significantly more than the value of the property. So your downside, your potential downside, is taking possession, um, taking possession to a property that doesn't have any value. There are other things where a property may look like it has value, but there's wetlands that go through the property. There can be endangered species that live on the property. That's something that you really have to deal with. Where I am, it's gopher tortoises and burrowing owls. They're all over the place, and if you don't know how to look for that information, you can really get yourself into a pickle. So there are potential downsides. A lot. I mean, and I'll give one more example. So you buy a tax lien or a tax deed on a single family home, and let's just say the certificate is $4,500. This was their annual tax amount, and then 2 years goes by. You're going to be when you're asked to foreclose on the property, you have to pay all of the subsequent taxes and fees. So your cost might be about $15,000. Well, turns out you didn't do your homework well, and the house was burned down, and now it's a vacant lot with a bunch of code enforcement violations, right? This is something that can happen. Now, is that the expectation? Of course not. But you want to be paying attention to this kind of stuff before you foreclose, right? You don't want to be caught with your pants down on something like that.
Makes sense. Always do your diligence and research. Yeah.
Correct.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We've got another question here. Is there a registration process for tax liens and or tax deeds?
Yeah, with a tax lien, it's W-9, right? So you're gonna fill out a W-9. You're going to place a deposit with the county in order to purchase there. And you might have to sign like a document that says that you understand that this is a lien carrying an interest rate. But it's a really, really simple, it's just filling out a W-9 essentially. And so sometimes if, and I'm not an attorney. I can't give legal advice on this, but if you're some counties, if you're out of the country, if you're in Canada or, you might have to set up a C corp in the States in order to participate in some of these sales because they will require some type of tax ID number. But yeah, registration's relatively simple.
Perfect. One other question, Bonetta says, hello, since you don't own the property and just have a tax lien certificate, how do you protect your investment since you can't get insurance? What happens if the property catches fire, as an example? I think you more or less answered that, but if you want to answer it a slightly different way, feel free to.
Sure. So, you're kind of at during that redemption period, you're in a position where you don't want to insure the property, can't really insure the property. Um, I'm a big advocate for vacant land for investing and just vacant land because um, especially in other states where you have this possession, when you foreclose, you take possession of the property. You find that happens a lot more on vacant land than single family homes. And I've been very fortunate over the past couple of years to just pick up a lot of property from just back tax amounts. But there's not really a lot you can do to protect from that. However, you can always maybe evaluate how much vacant land is going for in a specific neighborhood and try to think of maybe 3 years of taxes versus that value. What would be, which is greater, but this is a pretty rare occurrence that would happen.
And with South Florida, our land value, property prices without structures on them is so significant that, even if a house burnt down and you've got $10,000 or $15,000 invested, you're almost certainly going to see a return unless, again, there's some significant issue with huge amounts of code violations and municipal fines. But even then, most of the time, we're able to mitigate those down to cents on the dollar. If 100,000 in municipal fines, we're all often able to go to these cities and get them discounted down to $15,000, even sometimes as little as $5,000, $3,000. So yeah.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
So something that was told to me years ago was that the reason that these cities and counties will negotiate the daily fines away had to do with the Supreme Court case where it was ruled a violation of the Eighth Amendment, where it's just an excessive fine. $250 a day for uncut grass was considered excessive. And, if a lot of times if these went to court, they might get ruled.
To be honest, I've never actually heard that explanation. I can tell you that my opinion is if that were actually true, they would not make the daily fines so quote unquote excessive. They would make them $5 a day or $10 a day. I think really it's more a lot of bark and not a lot of bite. They want to scare people into getting into compliance. And if they say you have uncut grass or you're parking in the swale on the street and on the swale of the property, they want you to get into compliance. And by making it $100 a day or $200 a day, it really is scaring you because the numbers start to look big. But obviously what the cities don't want to do is they don't want to punish people into getting into compliance. They want to, on one hand, scare people and punish them when they're not in compliance, but they want to, when you are in compliance, they want to reward you, so to speak, and really mitigate those fines, especially that a lot of times these properties are sold to investors who are fixing up the property. They're doing the right thing. They're beautifying the community and the neighborhood. And I almost every time we've been a part of these types of fine mitigation processes, we've done dozens and dozens of these types of hearings. We're able to get those numbers down to a very, cents on a dollar, so to speak. Maybe one time we had a bit of a problem because the owner was the same and he really, was not listening to the city and being a bit obstinate. I think they reduced it down to about 45, 50 cents on the dollar, but that was the worst outcome we have. But I don't want to get too far off topic here. So
no, sure. But I appreciate you answering that.
Sure. Let's jump back into tax auctions here. So.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about the auction process. And I know we've kind of alluded or talked about a lot of this at this point, but when you are participating in that auction, tax lien goes up for sale. They start at 18% and the interest is bid down. Now, lowest bid wins. Now you can't see what other people are bidding, right? You know, if you're bidding on a property with 5 other people, you don't know what their lowest bid is. The way these bids work is you just kind of put your minimum, into the website and click check. And then on the day of the sale, they just close the auction, lowest bid wins. Now, most counties have something called a proxy bid system. And the way the proxy bid system works is that you put in your absolute lowest, but if I placed a bid of say 0.25%, but nobody else even bid, it'll give it to me at 18% at the maximum, right? If let's just say there was one other bidder that bid at 10%, I would get it at 9.75. So it'll actually, maximize the interest rate that you can get with this proxy bid system. The computer just bids for you.
And
But
that's in all counties. That's all counties that it does that.
no,
Just
most counties do, but there's
most.
a handful
Okay.
that you can always look at the auction rules and it'll either say proxy bid or direct bid.
Got
And
it.
a direct bid, it's what you bid is what you get.
That's helpful.
I think some of the drawback, maybe one of the negative sides is that when you're picking up this lien, you're picking it up at the beginning of the redemption period. With the over-the-counter certificates, you're allowed to purchase tax liens that are already 2, 3, 4 years old. Like we could go log on to whatever county right now and buy a tax lien today and foreclose on it immediately because it's already past its 2 years. Now, I think that's exciting for someone who's looking for a quicker turnaround. We're looking, maybe 5, 6 months at the most for that whole foreclosure process. But with these auctions, you're in just 2 years of kind of doing nothing. Another thing I say, tax liens are like 99% waiting, right? Sure, we buy it at the auction, we do this due diligence and we buy it at the auction. Then I'm waiting for up to 2 years before I do anything else with it, right? You might get some checks in the mail between now and then. But I think for some people who are a little bit more active of an investor, you've got to wait on your hands here.
Carmen asks, what happens if you buy the tax lien for 2023 and they don't pay it for 2024? Will there be another tax lien created for 2024?
Great question. Yes. So there will be another tax lien created, but in order for you to get your hands on that tax lien, you would have to bid on it again at the next auction. Most states, New Jersey, Arizona, Colorado, you're just paying those subsequent years as they come due, right? So I buy that first year, it gives me the first right of refusal for all subsequent years. So I buy the first one at, and let's just say I'm in New Jersey. I buy it and I bid all the way down to 0%. I'm getting 0% of my money there. But all of the subsequent years that I'm purchasing, I'm getting 18% annually on all of those. So usually shakes out pretty well in a place like New Jersey. Excuse me.
Florida, though, is that
Florida, you gotta participate in the auction every year to get those subsequent years. And so you might get, say, 10% on the first year, but maybe only 2% on the following year.
Got it.
So,
Got it.
Yeah. And let's talk about what happens if the property owner doesn't pay. And again, I know we've kind of alluded to this, but let's just put some names on things here. The first thing that's happening is you are, once you're past that redemption period, is you're foreclosing. There's a term that we use in Florida, the tax deed application process, or TDA for short. And when you file that TDA, you file your application, the county's basically going to do a bunch of work for you. They're going to send out notice to the property owners and to all other lien holders. Property owner doesn't pay. There's a couple of things that we'll do. I'll show you examples of it in a moment. And then they're going to sell that property off, right? The big takeaway here is that the junior encumbrances are wiped out in this foreclosure process. And once the tax deed application process is done, the property is auctioned off to the highest bidder. Um, you know, this is sort of the step-by-step process. I couldn't really get anything else for roll up other than music notes, but this is the this is really the step-by-step process for what you're looking at with the tax deed application. So we have a certificate. Kessler Kelley LLC has a certificate for on Bob's house at $1,000. It's been 2 years. And now this is the part where I think one of the questions you would ask applies, which is, well, I'm ready to foreclose. So what about the subsequent years of taxes? I don't own those. What do I do? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're paying what they call the roll up. The roll up is the remaining outstanding taxes other than the certificate that you have. This is going to be done on a county website that I'll actually show you a screenshot of in a moment. So we're paying the roll up, and then we're paying any TDA fees, right? This is usually $300-400. This is so that the county has the money to send notice and to pull a title search on the property. Notice gets sent to the property owner, giving them an ultimatum. It just says, okay, here's how it's going to work. Kessler Kelley LLC has filed the tax deed application. They're all into this for $4,000, but because you owe interest, you're going to have to pay them $4,400. And if you don't, we're going to sell your property in order to pay them back. If the property owner doesn't pay, the property is then transferred to the clerk's office for sale. The clerk's going to ask you for an additional fee at that point. This is about 90 days later. They'll ask you for another $300 to advertise the auction, and then the property will go up for sale. Right. So this is kind of the step-by-step of what it looks like. And I can show you what the actual, what it looks like to file a TDA. This is on county website, right? This is in, my website or a special software, or, propertyonion.com, which is a phenomenal software if you're getting into tax deeds and foreclosures. This is actually just the county site. So we'll take this first line here. If I want to foreclose on this tax lien, what I do is I check this box and I click apply, and that's it. That's the foreclosure process on a tax lien in the state of Florida. So a little bit different.
Phil, can that be either the year one tax certificate holder or year two? Either can do that?
It can be any certificate holder, assuming that their certificate is at least 2 years old.
Got it. Okay.
So I could buy a tax lien and hold on to it for 5 years, and there could be 4 other subsequents. 3 of us would have the right to foreclose. 2 of us wouldn't, because they're not at their 2-year maturation. So so anyone can do it. It's just whoever pulls the trigger first.
Most of the time in Florida, it's being foreclosed on after year 2. The first year's certificate holder is normally going to foreclose.
Yes. And there's a couple of reasons why, right? Remember that these these interest rates are typically bid down when they go up for auction. So so-and-so hedge funds holding onto this certificate, their 5% is already accrued, and, they might be getting, I don't know, on top of that, maybe a couple percent a year or something like that. Assume it would, they're not getting the full 18% on their certificate is what I'm saying. When you file this tax deed application, a couple of really cool things happen. Number one, you compound any interest that you've accrued up until that point. So we say we have, Bob with this $100 tax lien, and we're owed $120 because of the interest. Well, when we file, we start earning 18% on $120. So the interest rate is put up to 18%. It maxes out at 18%, and you compound your interest. The other thing that happens in this step here is that not only you're compounding your interest, you're earning 18% on all of the fees that you're throwing into this as well. So these are just 2 liens that I have sitting around that are foreclosable right now. And you see the face amounts aren't very much, right? 143.73. a lot of times this is the kind of property that makes it all the way to 2 years. Most tax liens pay back within that 2 year window, but the ones that don't, a lot of them look like this. So the cost to foreclose, the cost to foreclose on this is, 1552, and my original investment was only 147. So in this scenario, I go from earning 18% on 147 to the 18% on 1552 plus, 158, all the interest that I've accrued up until this point. So, so kind of a cool process there, but the actual foreclosure is 2 clicks, and then I put my bank information in. This is the notice that the county's sending out to the property owner. It just says, warning, there's unpaid taxes on a property which you own or in which you have a legal interest. The property is going to be sold on this date, right? This is the ultimatum, just saying, hey, you've got 90 days to pay the 1552 plus any interest, or we're going to sell your property in order to satisfy that debt. 90 days goes by and the county, still is, the investor, still unpaid. And that's when we end up in one of these tax deed auctions here. So a lot of you on here may have looked at foreclosures and tax deeds in the past. I mean, this is just from the Lee County website. And I can see right here, the opening bid on this property is $25.17. This is just what's owed to the lien holder, right? Someone bought a tax lien for maybe $600. They waited 2 years. They paid all the subsequent taxes. They might be out of pocket, $22.50, something like that, but they're owed $25.17 because of the interest that's been accruing, right? So someone comes in here and assuming that this property is worth more than $2,500 plus, fees and things like that, someone may bid a reasonable amount of money for it. And that's really the end of the tax lien process, right? After that, we kind of move into tax deed. So let's take a second. Are there any questions that came in?
Yeah, I've got a few questions on the tax deeds and clearing title, which we'll get to. I'm kind of holding off on those, everyone who did ask some questions on that. But we've got 1 or 2 on tax liens here. In the state of Florida, it's 5% minimum guaranteed every year for the last few years.
So it's not an annual guarantee. It is assessed to the property owner on day one. So you earn 5% on the first day, and that 5% is just the maximum that you'll ever receive on that penalty. Now, again, interest can accrue above and beyond that, but it's not an annual. It doesn't like re-up at the end of the year, if that makes sense.
And that's for each certificate. So year 2 certificate, there's also a 5% penalty, correct?
Correct.
Got it. And one more question before I'll save some of these others for after we go into tax deeds a little more. But Michelle says, a property in my condo association owed more than 10 years back taxes. It never went to tax sale. Is this common?
So no, it's not very common. There is a 7-year statute of limitations on property taxes. So what we see, not that often anymore, but back in, 2018, 2019, what you'd see a lot of were people who had over the years had accrued 7 years of outstanding taxes. And the taxes that were owed are more than the property was worth. So this person's in this position where they're never going to have to pay property taxes again, because the cost to foreclose to get that property at auction would be all of the back taxes plus fees. And let's just say that number's $25,000, but the property's only worth 20. It doesn't make any financial sense for someone to buy a lien on there and foreclose because it's just not worth it. The way that 7-year statute of limitation works is that, let's say we tax liens issued today, we buy it at auction, 2 years from today, we're allowed to foreclose, to file our tax deed application. But for some reason we don't, maybe we forgot or something. Well, 5 years after that, or 7 total, that property, that certificate that we own is going to expire and we would lose our investment. Right? I mean, realistically, the biggest threat that you have with tax lien investing is time. If you're not paying attention, you hold on to it too long, you can lose your investment just because of time. So you'll see properties that have these rolling 7 years of taxes where the 2024 certificate comes on and the 2017 falls off. The 2025 comes on, the 2018 falls off. So it's just like a rolling 7 years of taxes. You see that sometimes. Pretty rare, but that might be what happened with that in that condo that you were talking about. Okay, so we spent most of our time on tax liens, but I'm just gonna talk tax deeds on a pretty high level here because I think they're a lot more straightforward. Um, you know, the purpose of buying a tax deed is to get a property at a discount, right? We're in a very, very competitive real estate market down here. And the problem with being in a competitive real estate market is that people know what their property's worth. They can just go on to Zillow and say, "Oh yeah, well look, it's worth 475," and that's why they're not willing to take a significant haircut because Zillow told them. And this leads to problems for traditional real estate investors, whether you're wholesaling or fix and flip, or even buy and hold. I think buy and hold probably the least amount of issues with that, but tax deeds are still a way to get property at a pretty significant discount. Now, the majority of what you see at auction every year at these tax deed auctions is vacant land, right? And again, I'll always argue for vacant land. There is no rehab. I don't have to worry about the tenants and toilets and trash and all that stuff. It is, the absence of property that I'm buying. And it's almost like, just trading paper, right? You don't have to worry about a lot of the other stuff that you would worry about with a home. However, I'll say this, the due diligence on vacant land tends to be a little bit more intensive than it does on, say, a single family home. I know that seems counterintuitive, but just in my experience, that seems to be the case. But we see hundreds and hundreds of properties every single week going up for auction. And the best place to look at what properties are going up for auction every single week is on propertyonion.com. And so if you don't have, if you don't have the link to that, please, go on there right now. Fantastic website for tracking all of this data throughout the state of Florida and beyond. But they list every single property that's going up for auction, whether it's a foreclosure or a tax deed. So, at the end of the day, we're looking at buying property at a discount, but let's talk about the things that can go wrong. And I think this is the thing that, people like to hear, which is like, well, how can I mess up? Because all this seems really too easy. Well, number one, the condition of the property, right? The easiest thing to do when you are potentially buying a property is get eyes on it, right? That's some of the best due diligence you can do is get physical eyes on that property and make an assessment about the condition. Now, there are certain things that you may not be able to see from the outside, but thankfully, the state of Florida has really, really awesome public record systems where I can go and I can pull, let's say there's something in Cape Coral that I'm looking at. I can go to the city building department and I can pull permits on that property and I can see what permits have been issued. And these are going to be, I saw it has a new roof in 2023. It has a new plumbing system in 2019. AC was replaced in 2015. Like you can see all this stuff in either the city or the county building department. So that is beyond a physical inspection. These are things that I'm looking for in terms of a on paper inspection. Are there any upcoming assessments, right? So sometimes you buy a vacant lot for $10,000 and you didn't realize that the city is installing, a city water and sewer system that next year, and it's going to be $45,000 added to your property taxes over the next 10 years. Like that's a big one that if you're not looking for it, it might really it'll eat all the profit in your deal. We talked about endangered species, and there's there's a bird called a scrub jay. Scrub jays are all over the state. You can't, there's bald eagles where I'm at too. You'll see bald eagles. There's all sorts of endangered species here in Florida. We're basically the Australia of America. And, there's definitely animals that you need to know if they exist. And you might have to get a permit or a professional relocate them to, what do you call it? A place where they would relocate them. I can't think of the word. Um, CDD bonds. If you don't know what these are, well, back in the 70s, there were smaller communities and maybe more rural areas. Like I'll use Sebring, Florida as an example here. And the county and the state didn't have the money to pave roads and fix these places up. So what they did is they authorized these like HOAs, and I could be butchering this, so let me know if I am, but they authorized these HOAs to basically become governmental units. And so these governmental units had, an HOA basically has government power in order to raise money to pave roads and cut grass and do X, Y, and Z. They would offer bonds to investors, and they would use HOA dues. And HOA dues, they use that lightly to pay these bonds back. But the problem is that if people aren't paying property taxes, well, then they're not able to pay these bonds, and sometimes they'll go into default. And when these bonds go into default, that money is passed on to the property owner. So you'll see this happen quite a bit where, quite a bit, I use that loosely. But if it's in an area that has a bond in default, you'll have these $45,000, $50,000 tags that you can't even find when you search title. You have to know exactly where to get that information. And that's one of the things that we help you do as well. Finally, the title issues, and this seems to be a big one, and it's an important one to understand as well. Um, the title issues that you can absolutely get your hands on something that has title defects. Now, I wanted to mention quiet title action. And do you guys do quiet title action as well?
We do, yes. And so I'd say the number one thing that we do with tax deed properties when people buy them, and we have a lot of investors that buy properties in foreclosures or regular bank foreclosures, auctions, association foreclosures. But when they come from the tax deed sale, when they try to sell the property, so let's say they buy it, maybe they fix it up a little bit, and then sometimes maybe they'll put a tenant into it and rent it for a few years, or sometimes they're just fixing and flipping. When they do go to sell the property, if it's under, I believe it's 4 years, then we have to do what's called a quiet title lawsuit. So we will go and get a title commitment to look for any and all parties that need to be named. And it's very similar to a foreclosure process, a bank foreclosure. Typically, it's uncontested. Typically, it's relatively quick, but it does cost money. It's an added expense for those people who buy these properties. And if they want to flip these quickly in under a 4-year period, then they're going to have to pay us for something like that. The costs on that kind of vary depending on if it's uncontested or contested, but you're looking at probably starting at about $2,500 and probably about I'd say probably more like 4 to 6 month time frame, depending on if there's any deceased people that need to be named. That makes it more complicated to name estates and things like that. But that's kind of the time frame you're looking at. So in some ways, the clear title process as opposed to a bank foreclosure is a little more straightforward because you generally know what types of liens are in fact fully sort of quashed there. But it's the title underwriter that's going to require these types of quiet title suits. So I just want to kind of mention that there. One other thing I do want to say, because we haven't really mentioned it throughout the presentation, but and we'll mention it again at the end, but this is sort of a high level review of all of these tax deed and tax lien kind of procedures and rules and benefits. But you all at Property Onion, you and your academy, you teach classes on this. You have customer service reps that will answer these questions in more detail, and you have memberships to the academy. Again, we'll talk more in detail about that, but I did put the link in the chat here, which is propertyonion.com. Anyone who has questions, they can go to propertyonion.com and call the academy. There's customer service reps available throughout the day. So just want to mention that.
Yeah, and one other thing, propertystudent.com. If you go to propertystudent.com, you'll get a free consultation with us and one of our experts, and we can kind of build a path for you. But the training is really, it's hand holding just to take you through let's say we're doing a foreclosure training. Hey, let's actually do all the due diligence leading up to it with you. Let's attend the auction with you. We go through that whole process, and it's like having an expert just as your shadow on your back. And these are all one-on-one. It's not like a group training kind of thing. It's one-on-one, customized to you, your situation, where you want to invest, that sort of thing. So yeah, propertystudent.com, you can get a free consultation on that. Yeah, the other thing about the title issues is, the whole 4-year thing is kind of interesting because I don't know if you know this, but the 4-year thing is just like an arbitrary number. Maybe it's not arbitrary, that the title companies picked, right? In Florida, there's a 20-year period where an individual can overturn a tax sale. They can apply to overturn a tax sale for up to 20 years after the sale. Now, it's very expensive to do, and it's extremely unlikely that anyone would do that far into it, because there's all sorts of interest and penalties they have to pay to do that. But the title companies looked at a million of these tax deeds, and they said, okay, if we give out policies, title insurance policies at 4 years or later, then if the number of people who kick back and challenge at that point that we have to pay for would be less, the cost of that would be less than the money we would make on title policies. So that's why they just picked 4 years. They felt that was the number that if it hadn't been challenged within 4 years, it's never going to be challenged. But without a doubt, quiet the title to your property as opposed to either waiting and kind of, because I know some people who buy a property and they'll just rent it out. They'll kind of put a tenant in there. They're not worried about the quiet title action because they're not looking at resale. But I would argue that it is a good thing to quiet the title no matter what. Now, I did have a question about when you were talking about the quiet title action service. So let's say someone passed away and we find out that they have 17 heirs to the property. What is that going to do to the quiet title action suit? There's 17 heirs.
It can definitely slow things down, and we may have to publish service against them. So it's really more of a time thing. It's a time cost.
Yeah.
And there are some additional costs as well, because you have to pay to publish and you have to pay to do some of these other jump through these other hoops. But it's really mostly just adding time onto the quiet title, especially if you have a property. What happens a lot is we get properties under contract from new investors. Maybe not new investors, but investors who are new to the tax deed sale and tax deed auction process. They come to us with a contract. We run a title commitment, and our title underwriter says this was just purchased at a tax deed auction, and therefore you need to do a quiet title. So then I have to walk the client through the process about how to get started with that. Most of the time they have us do those quiet title lawsuits. But if they want to keep the buyer on the hook, they certainly need to manage their expectations with that. And sometimes the buyers may walk, because obviously if they're looking to close on this in 3 weeks or 30 days or 45 days, that's not going to happen. And sometimes they'll just cancel the deal during the inspection period. Other times the buyer will give the additional time and be very interested in the property, and everything works out, and it just takes 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to close on the property. So that's kind of what happens on our end. So.
Would you recommend that people just quiet title regardless of their exit strategy? That you think it's just a good thing to do when you buy a tax deed?
Think it is a good thing to do. But again, I'm a little biased. Obviously, two things. I'm not only a closing attorney that handles a high volume of closings, so I like things to be smooth and easy, not just for us and our staff, but also for the clients who are bringing a buyer and they're looking to sell the property. It's nice if they just do that up front. And then we can go ahead and sell that property at any given time. Because even if someone thinks I'm going to rent this property for years, plans change sometimes. I thought I'd have many of the properties I purchased for a long time, and over time I've sold some of those that I didn't expect at the time of buying it, that I was going to do so. So that's one thing. The other thing is just that, well, I'd say the counterpoint to that is if someone does really keep a property and they rent it out for 4 years, then it's no longer really an issue. So I guess that's kind of the counterpoint, and really it's based on the intentions and the an investor being very realistic about what their time frame is for owning that property. And if they realistically can't say that I've got a 90% chance or more of keeping that property for 4 years or more, then you know what? Just begin that quiet title process. Yeah, maybe $2,500 or so. It's not nothing. Obviously, it's real money, but certainly if you find a buyer at a high price and you want to sell it a year later or 2 years later, you don't want to lose that buyer. So that could be worth a lot more than $2,500. That's my response. Phil, I don't know if you have any more slides, but we do have a few questions. Is there anything else, or else I'll go to the Q&A?
I do. I have two more slides, and I can be pretty
Perfect.
quick with this.
I
I
good, and
do
then
want
we
to.
can answer that Q&A. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I want to talk about just working with a mentor and really what that looks like. Again, this is hand holding. This is taking you by the hand, helping you get from point A to exactly where you want to be, right? Getting invested in speed to deal is something that we talk about because, when you're doing this on your own, if you've never gotten into this, but you say, you know what, I think I want to get properties at a discount, I'm going to try tax deed auction. There are a number of things that we've talked about and stuff that we haven't even talked about that you can encounter. And it'd be impossible to cover all the things that could possibly go wrong in a webinar, but that's the value of having a mentor. I mean, I can tell you, again, I've been doing this for 12 years, but I'm still learning stuff, right? So having, someone like myself or, one of our mentors specifically who have, one of them has like 25 years experience doing this. So you get with someone like that and they will take you through this whole process, start to finish, and help you with the exit or disposition of the property. Finally is just how to start, right? And so again, Property Onion Academy, we are doing one-on-one trainings with industry experts. We do tax liens, we do tax deeds, and we do foreclosures. We even teach wholesaling. But this is going to be step-by-step due diligence and title research. Really, no matter which one of those three that you do, I think title research in some cases isn't necessary on the tax lien side. I think maybe a precursory, maybe 5-minute look through official records is probably good on the tax lien side for some. But propertystudent.com is where you can go to sign up for free consultation and let us at least explain to you what this is and what your mentorship would look like.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil. Let's jump into some Q&A here. Some of the questions we might have already covered, but we can run through them quickly.
Sure.
Chris asked, to be clear, IRS lien is above a property tax lien in Florida.
No, no. So it is the IRS lien. It would be, you can't really say it's subordinate because it's not technically subordinate, but the IRS has a right to redemption on a tax defaulted property. So for example, let's say we bought a property at auction for $10,000. It's worth $20,000 and the IRS has a $50,000 lien against this property. The IRS is given 120 days to basically buy us out of our position. They can pay us our $10,000 plus a 6% annualized rate of return on our 10,000. So let's just say this is whatever, 2 months later, it'd be like $10,100, something like that is what they would be required to pay us. They buy us out of our position, and then they can take that property and actually sell it on treasury.gov. And you'll see properties that are the result of a tax foreclosure on treasury.gov occasionally. And they'll only really do, the IRS is really only doing this on properties that have a significant amount of margin that's going to cover the whole lien amount. So pretty rare.
Thank you, Phil. Mohammed asks, so just to confirm, the mortgage and HOA and other liens are wiped out in a tax deed sale.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and the statute, for those that want to look it up, it's chapter 197 of the Florida statutes. We kind of have like a lot of this stuff spelled out, but yes, all junior encumbrances would be so these would be any basically privately held liens, meaning mortgages, HOAs, mechanics liens, those would be wiped out.
Sergey says, if I buy a property through the tax deed auction, I'm not getting the title right away, correct? In this case, do I have to go with a quiet title action to obtain the title? And are there other ways to get the title?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sergey. You are taking title immediately, actually. The moment that you pay in full and the clerk records that sale, they're issuing a tax deed with your name on it. This can happen within 24 hours of the sale, but you have immediate possessory rights as well. So, you're allowed to go and take possession of that property. Now, if someone's in there, it's not as easy as say, hey, get out. There's other things that would have to happen. You could file an unlawful detainer suit to get them out of there. But yes, you're taking title to it practically immediately.
I can tell you that we file about, I don't know, we're now pushing almost 400 evictions a month. Last month we did 380 evictions, which I include in that unlawful detainers. So we have a lot of clients that buy the tax deed foreclosures, and whoever's remaining in the property, typically, unless they know that it's a tenant. It's one thing if there is a tenant and they're a bona fide tenant, then they might need to honor that lease. But otherwise, we go ahead and file unlawful detainers to remove the former owners, occupants, etc., from the property. So that's a pretty common thing that we handle too.
What's the time frame on that typically on an unlawful detainer?
Very similar to an eviction. It's county court right at about 4 to, let's say, 8 weeks, depending on if it's contested, meaning if the occupants fight this and it goes to a hearing, or whether it's uncontested and they don't fight it, it's going to be more around the 4 to 5 week time frame. If not, it's a little longer, maybe about the 8 week time frame. Ira asks here, why are hedge funds not investing in the tax liens as much? I think you did mention they are investing, but if you want to talk on that, Bill?
Yeah, so they've definitely pulled back, because remember, hedge funds borrow a large portion of their money to invest. So if they're paying 7% on the money that they're borrowing, and interest rates get bid down to 6-7%, there's not a whole lot of money for these hedge funds to make. Where if I'm using my own money, like 7% is great, I'll take 7% all day. But if I had to borrow, like if I had to put that on a credit card, all of a sudden 7% doesn't seem as good, right?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. One thing, we're going to keep going with a few more questions here, but I did just want to mention that you all will be at the Broward Palm Beach REA tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and put the link here in the chat for the upcoming events. So you have that. It's bpmreia.com. And you can go to upcoming events to see that. And I just sent that to everyone there. A few more questions here. Ira's asking, where do you borrow money if you don't have your own to invest with? I don't know if that's a you question or, Yeah.
There are services out there, Ira, but let me tell you, they're not the most favorable terms. If you're borrowing money for a tax sale, and let's say you're borrowing, they're going to ask you come with 20% of whatever you want to, or maybe even higher than that, but they're going to keep 70% of profit. So, and this is for an individual. If you're a hedge fund and you're putting in 50 million and they're going to put in, that's different. But as an individual investor, say we're kind of in the low six-figure range, it's not very favorable. So
I have
I
another.
wouldn't.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
I was just gonna say I wouldn't recommend borrowing for tax sales.
Hmm. Two questions. What are the junior liens that get wiped out in the state of Florida, including the IRS liens? I think we discussed this at length. If you have anything else to add, you can. And then also, who pays the money back from the tax lien, which I think is the money from the auction, but you can answer that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so on the junior encumbrance, again, really anything that's issued by a private agency. So, a bank for like a mortgage or an HOA or you name it. As far as who pays the tax lien back,
I
um,
think the answer to that is the money comes from the proceeds of the auction. So if someone
correct.
buys the property for 100,000 and there's 15,000 tax liens, it gets paid out of that 100,000, correct?
You got it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Brett is asking, do auctions typically have to be a tenant in person? I think the answer is everything's online now. Is that correct, Phil?
Almost everything's online. I think that, 67 counties in Florida, and I think 65 of them are online in
Okay.
one place or another.
Sure, sure. Emiliano is asking if we are going to send a copy of the recording and the outline. It'll come from either our firm and or the Property Onion team. So thank you, Emiliano. Lorenzo is saying, what type of property insurance do you need after the tax deed sale if the property is occupied and there is no lease? I don't.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, unoccupied homeowners insurance would be something that you would get if it weren't occupied, right? But
I think that's going to be more of a question for your insurance agent to go to them and let them know your specific situation. So if you have an occupant that's in there, even if you're in the process of evicting them, you just bought the property, you want it to be insured, give them those facts and circumstances, and they'll let you know what type of product that you need. Michelle asks, our condo association did a quiet title action to extinguish an old non-performing mortgage lien. When we tried to sell the property, the title underwriter did not recognize the quiet title action, and they still wanted a written release from the lender. Why wouldn't the underwriter accept the quiet title? Michelle, I'm really not sure about that. That obviously is what the underwriters do is they take a risk reward position on almost all of these complex matters, and they'll see what the risk is of this. There are situations where if they feel the lender maybe wasn't properly served correctly, you need to serve their registered agent, or sometimes a lender can be out of business. So a lot of these old lenders, the Countrywides and there's any number of lenders that were around in the early 2000s that went out of business in 2007, 8, 9, even since then, or they've merged or been acquired. So maybe the company that was served is no longer technically in existence and was purchased by another company. So they may be worried about that. So that's always a possibility. And last question here, Ira asks, what does the lawyer do in terms of tax liens? I think we mentioned that we would go ahead and if our title underwriter, which almost all do, require a quiet title lawsuit after the tax deed is purchased and the property is purchased, we would go ahead and file that quiet title suit. Otherwise, we don't really get involved with tax liens otherwise.
yeah,
Yes, can you go ahead, Phil? Do you have that link to the propertystudent.com on the slide? I think it's there at the
I
bottom.
do. It's down here at the bottom.
Okay,
But
perfect.
I can't, unfortunately, I can't type into the chat, but I can.
Okay, no worries. Well, we're gonna go ahead and I typed it into the chat already.
Oh,
I'll go ahead and do that again here. But anyways, any last words that you have here, Phil, for everyone?
um, you know, uh, come see us at Property Onion. Even if you're not, even if you have, I would imagine if you have some experience with, on the foreclosure side, you're probably well familiar with Property Onion, but, come see us at the Academy if you feel like you need help getting your feet off the ground and getting into something new here. Um, Other than that, just I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you and with all your wonderful students. And it's really happy you guys asked all these questions. So if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us at Property Onion.
Well, we appreciate you. This is great content and a great sort of intro course here to tax liens and tax deeds, tax foreclosures. We really appreciate you. If anyone, again, if you have any questions, you can go to propertystudent.com or propertyonion.com and feel free to reach out to them, and they'll guide you on next steps for getting a little more education. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions. And we'll go ahead and send out that outline, and we will send out the link to the course and the recording as well. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. Bye.